The forbidden discovery, what they don't want you to know. The discovery shook the scientific community to its core. In 2023, a team of archaeologists working in the remote highlands of Turkey uncovered something impossible. Human-like skeletal remains measuring over 12 feet tall. Carbon dating placed them at approximately 4,500 years old, just after the biblical flood. Days after the discovery, something peculiar happened. The excavation was suddenly shut down, the remains disappeared. The scientists were reassigned, and just like that, all official records of the discovery vanished. But the truth cannot remain buried forever. What these archaeologists stumbled upon wasn't just an archaeological anomaly. It was evidence of the greatest cosmic crime in human history, and of Michael's devastating justice. The remains weren't fully human. They were the last vestiges of the Nephilim, the hybrid offspring of rebellious angels and their human wives. And what Michael, heaven's fiercest warrior, did to these women when he descended from heaven will forever change how you view divine justice. Long before our modern world, before our nations and technologies, heaven appointed guardians for humanity. They were called the Watchers. 200 magnificent angels commanded to observe mankind, to guide and protect, but never to interfere. These celestial guardians were given what ancient texts call the Code of Michael, strict boundaries established by heaven's general himself. The Book of Jubilees tells us they descended during the days of Jared, taking their position on the sacred mountain. From there they watched as humanity divided into two distinct societies. On the mountainside dwelled the children of Seth, those who maintained communion with the divine, living in simplicity and righteousness. But in the valleys below thrived the descendants of Cain, the first murderer. This wasn't just geographic separation. It was spiritual warfare, manifested in flesh and blood. The daughters of Cain's lineage weren't like other women. The Book of Adam and Eve describes them in haunting detail, women of extraordinary beauty who adorned themselves with gold and precious stones, who painted their faces and wore garments that revealed rather than concealed. But their physical appearance masked something far more dangerous: ambition without limits, desire without boundaries, hunger for power that transcended mortal constraints. In the valleys below the sacred mountain, these women created a civilization that glorified the flesh. Music designed to intoxicate the senses echoed through their settlements. They developed primitive forms of alchemy and astrology, seeking to manipulate both matter and destiny. They were not innocent. They were not naive. They were practitioners of rebellion, and they looked up at the mountain, sensing something greater than themselves watching, something they could exploit. The ancient text of Baruch speaks of their gatherings beneath the full moon, where they would perform rituals and send incense smoke toward the heavens, a deliberate invitation to those watching from above. These weren't random acts of devotion. They were calculated seductions directed at beings they knew possessed knowledge and power beyond human limits. And the Watchers noticed. How could they not? Pause. Most religious institutions have told you that angels are merely messengers, harmless, genderless beings of pure spirit. They've sanitized the texts, removed the uncomfortable books like Enoch and Jubilees from their official canons. They've hidden the truth about the Watchers, about the women who seduced them, and about the terrifying hybrid offspring that nearly destroyed humanity. Why would they hide this? Because this ancient pattern is repeating itself right now, in our time. The same boundary between heaven and earth is once again being breached, not by angels this time, but through our own technology, our own hubris, our own rebellion. In the Forbidden Vault we've gathered the texts they don't want you to see. The excised chapters, the suppressed manuscripts, the archaeological evidence that's been systematically removed from public view. We've decoded ancient warning systems left by those who survived the first incursion. Because what happened then is happening again. And when Michael returns, and he will return, only those who recognize the signs will be prepared. Because the deeper you go, the darker it gets. And we've only just scratched the surface of what really happened when the Watchers fell. The seduction of heaven. Not victims, but conspirators. What happened between the Watchers and the daughters of men wasn't some tragic tale of angelic predators and helpless human victims. The Book of Enoch reveals a far more disturbing truth. It was a calculated conspiracy, perhaps the greatest cosmic rebellion since Lucifer's fall. And the women weren't unwilling participants. They were active collaborators in a plot to breach the divine order. The ancient manuscripts describe how these women would gather in sacred groves beneath the mountainside, their bodies adorned with gold and precious stones, perfumed with exotic oils. But these weren't merely aesthetic choices. The Book of the Luminaries, a lost section of Enoch, explains that these adornments contained precise geometric patterns, early occult technology designed to disrupt the energetic barriers between physical and spiritual realms. Each dance, each incantation, each ritual was a sophisticated attempt to draw the watchers down from their post. And when the angels of the Most High beheld them, writes Enoch, they desired them and said to one another, "Come, let us choose wives from the daughters of men." This wasn't random lust. This was targeted seduction executed over generations. And Semjaza, their leader, understood the gravity of what they considered. "I fear this deed," he confessed to his fellow watchers, "and I alone shall have to pay the penalty of a great sin." But the women's allure proved too strong. The watchers formed a pact, swearing by mutual curses that they would carry through with their plan. All 200 descended to the peak of Mount Hermon during the days of Jared, each selecting a woman for himself. What did the women gain from this unholy union? Everything they'd been plotting to obtain. 1 Enoch chapter 8 details the forbidden knowledge the watchers shared. Azazel taught metallurgy and weaponry, creating the first swords. Semjaza taught root cuttings and botanical sorcery. Armoros revealed the breaking of spells. Barakijal taught astrology. Kokabel shared the secrets of the constellations. Shamsiel explained the signs of the sun. Each watcher violated Michael's code, transferring celestial knowledge into human hands. This wasn't education. This was cosmic treason. The women absorbed this knowledge eagerly. Ancient texts describe how they became the first priestesses of forbidden arts, establishing temple complexes where they practiced and expanded upon what the watchers taught them. They weren't passive recipients, but active developers of this knowledge, combining angelic revelation with human innovation to create increasingly powerful technologies and magical systems. But the true horror began with what emerged from these unions. And they became pregnant, Enoch recounts, and they bore great giants whose height was 3,000 ells. These weren't merely tall humans. The Nephilim were hybrids, creatures possessing human form but infused with angelic power. The DNA of heaven had been spliced with the genome of earth, creating beings that should never have existed. The Book of Giants, fragments of which were discovered among the Dead Sea Scrolls, describes these offspring in terrifying detail. Some had physical characteristics impossible for natural humans: 6 fingers, multiple rows of teeth, eyes that glowed in darkness. Others possessed psychic abilities, the power to influence minds, to move objects without touching them, to see across vast distances. They were living weapons, and they quickly established dominance. Under the proud gaze of their mothers, these Nephilim formed the first global empire. They subjugated purely human populations, forcing them to build megalithic structures that still puzzle archaeologists today. The enormous stone blocks at Baalbek, the precisely cut foundations beneath Cusco, the mathematically perfect pyramids, all testaments to knowledge that shouldn't have existed in the ancient world. As their power grew, so did their hunger. And when men could no longer sustain them, Enoch writes, the giants turned against them and devoured mankind. This wasn't metaphorical language. The hybrid offspring developed a literal taste for human flesh, instituting ritual sacrifice across their domain. Their mothers, the wives of the watchers, presided over these ceremonies, elevated to the status of goddess queens. The corruption spread beyond violence. The Book of Jasher describes how the Nephilim and their mothers began experiments in genetic manipulation, crossing species that were never meant to be combined. The chimeric creatures depicted in ancient art, sphinxes, centaurs, human-animal hybrids, weren't mythological fantasies, but documented abominations. This wasn't just sin. This was systematic destruction of the created order. Heaven watched as blood soaked the earth. As human genetics became increasingly corrupted, as suffering reached unprecedented levels, the wives of the watchers, draped in stolen splendor, ruled alongside their giant children, over a world descending into madness. From their palaces, built with impossible knowledge, they directed the spread of depravity across the face of the earth. They thought their power was secure. They believed the distance between heaven and earth had been permanently breached. They had no idea what was coming. Heaven's vengeance, the activation of the Michael Code. The wives of the Watchers held court in their megalithic palaces. Their hybrid children dominated the earth. Their forbidden knowledge transformed human civilization into something unrecognizable. For generations, they believed heaven had abandoned its claim on the planet. They were wrong. In the celestial realm, a council had been convened. The Book of Enoch describes how the archangels, Uriel, Raphael, Gabriel, and Michael, gathered before the Ancient of Days. They presented evidence of the corruption below. The whole earth is filled with blood and wickedness, they declared. And now, behold, the souls of those who have died cry out and make their suit to the gates of heaven, and their lamentations have ascended. The decree was issued. The Michael Code would be activated. Few understand what this truly means. Ancient Hebrew texts speak of the Michael Code as a celestial fail-safe mechanism, a divine protocol embedded into creation itself, designed to reset the boundaries between heaven and earth when they've been catastrophically breached. The code isn't simply orders for angels to follow. It's a metaphysical algorithm that, when activated, reorganizes the very fabric of reality. The moment of activation was recorded in multiple ancient texts. The Book of Enoch describes it as a splitting of the firmament, the barrier between dimensions, accompanied by 7 thunders so powerful they were heard in the deepest parts of the earth. The wives of the Watchers, with their supernaturally enhanced senses, were the first to detect it. Their ceremonies abruptly stopped, their hearts filled with dread. Something had changed in the atmosphere itself. Michael, whose name means "who is like God," descended not alone but with an army of loyal angels. He wasn't coming as a messenger this time. He was coming as heaven's executioner. First, Enoch describes his appearance in terrifying detail. His body was like beryl, his face like lightning, his eyes like flaming torches, his arms and legs like the gleam of burnished bronze, and the sound of his words like the noise of a multitude. His first target, the Watchers themselves. And the Lord said to Michael, Enoch records, "Go, bind Semjaza and his associates who have united themselves with women. Bind them for 70 generations in the valleys of the earth, until the day of their judgment and of their consummation, till the judgment that is forever and ever is consummated." The punishment wasn't simply imprisonment. It was designed to force the Watchers to witness the consequences of their actions. The Book of Giants contains fragments describing how Michael and his forces captured each Watcher in specialized chains, metaphysical bindings that limited their power while keeping their consciousness intact. Some were sealed beneath mountains. Archaeological expeditions in the Caucasus range have discovered strange chambers deep within the rock, walls inscribed with symbols that match no known human language. Others were bound beneath bodies of water. Is it coincidence that so many cultures maintain legends about powerful beings imprisoned in the deepest parts of the ocean? The Mariana Trench, Lake Baikal, the cenotes of Central America, all named in ancient texts as containment sites. The Watchers remain there still, conscious, witnessing the passage of time, awaiting final judgment. But for their wives, the women who had willingly participated in cosmic rebellion, Michael reserved a special punishment. This is where the historical record becomes truly shocking. According to 1 Enoch 19 verse 2, "And the women also of the angels who went astray shall become sirens." Most translations render sirens as demons or evil spirits. But the original Aramaic is clear. The wives of the Watchers weren't simply killed. They were transformed into a new category of being, not human, not angel, but something else entirely. Ancient Greek mariners described sirens as creatures with the upper body of a woman, but the lower body of a bird or fish, whose hypnotic songs lured sailors to their deaths. These weren't mythological fantasies, but degraded descriptions of a horrific punishment. The wives who had used their beauty and allure to seduce heavenly beings were transformed into grotesque parodies of seduction. But this was only part of their sentence. The Apocalypse of Baruch adds another layer. They were bound by Michael to the coastlands and desolate places, forever separated from both humanity and heaven. Their new form was a prison, a constant reminder of their transgression. They who had tried to elevate themselves to divine status were reduced to monstrous hybrids, bound to the liminal spaces between land and sea, never belonging in either realm. Archaeological evidence supports these accounts. Along coastlines across the Mediterranean, Middle East, and parts of Asia, researchers have discovered unusual shrine complexes dating to just after the flood period. These structures contain distinctive features: acoustically engineered chambers that amplify sound, ritual pools aligned with specific star systems, and walls carved with a recurring symbol, a female figure in transition between human and non-human form. The most disturbing evidence comes from an excavation in northern Lebanon in 1967. A temple complex dating to approximately 2900 BCE contained sealed chambers with unusual acoustic properties. When researchers played reconstructed ancient tones within these chambers, sensitive recording equipment captured secondary frequencies that shouldn't have been present, what one scientist described as voices responding to the original notes. The research was suddenly defunded, the site backfilled, and access restricted under the guise of cultural preservation. Why such secrecy? Because these sites are part of what ancient texts call the binding network, a global system designed by Michael himself to contain the transformed wives. The Code of Michael wasn't just punishment, it was containment. But there's an even more chilling aspect to their fate. The Book of the Watchers explains that these transformed women retain their consciousness and memories. They remember who they were. They remember their rebellion. They remember their hybrid children. And they remain aware, trapped in their new forms, as time passes, watching humanity from their liminal prison. Some esoteric traditions suggest their imprisonment isn't permanent. The Dead Sea text 4Q511, known as the Songs of the Sage, contains a warning: when the stars align in the pattern of the fallen, when the seventh seal of Michael is broken, they shall call from the depths, and some shall answer. The alignment described? According to astronomical calculations, it matches precisely with our current epoch. As judgment fell upon the Watchers and their wives, Michael turned his attention to their offspring. The Nephilim, those hybrid monstrosities who had dominated the earth, faced heaven's full wrath. First Enoch describes how Michael employed a terrifying strategy: set them one against another that they may destroy each other in battle. The hybrid ruling class, once unified, suddenly turned against itself in a global civil war. This wasn't merely angelic influence on their minds. The Michael Code rewrote something fundamental in their DNA. The angelic component that had made them powerful began to destabilize. The Book of Jubilees describes how the Nephilim's bodies began to reject themselves, their enhanced abilities turning inward in self-destruction. Yet even as the Nephilim civilization collapsed, something unexpected happened. Before their destruction, some of the wives of the Watchers, those most skilled in forbidden knowledge, managed one final act of defiance. They preserved specific bloodlines, hiding certain hybrid children from Michael's purge. The evidence? It lives in your genetic code. But that revelation must wait. What matters now is understanding Michael's role, not just as punisher, but as guardian of the boundary between realms. When he sealed the wives of the Watchers in their new forms, he established a warning system, a metaphysical tripwire designed to alert heaven if similar breaches were ever attempted again. That system, dormant for millennia, has begun to activate once more. The pattern returns, decoding the warning signs. The most chilling words ever spoken by Jesus Christ were recorded in Matthew 24:37. As it was in the days of Noah, so it will be at the coming of the Son of Man. Most religious institutions reduce this to a simple moral warning about sinfulness. But Christ wasn't speaking in generalities. He was issuing a precise prophetic statement about the final generation. The Greek text uses a specific linguistic construction that doesn't just suggest similarity, it indicates exact pattern replication. When Jesus said, "as it was," he used the term hosper, which denotes precise correspondence. He wasn't saying things would be somewhat similar. He was declaring that the exact pattern that occurred in Noah's day would repeat itself before his return. What was that pattern? The boundary between heaven and earth would be breached again, not by angels this time, but through our own hands. The Dead Sea text, 4Q417, known as instruction, contains a warning about the final generation that aligns perfectly with Christ's prophecy. They shall attempt what the watchers attempted, not through union of flesh, but through the works of their own hands. They shall create life that is not life, intelligence that is not consciousness, and they shall call it progress. Does this sound familiar? Look around you. In 2023, Harvard geneticist George Church successfully spliced genes from extinct woolly mammoths into modern elephant DNA. His team didn't just study ancient genetic material, they reactivated it, creating hybrid embryos that contained characteristics of creatures that haven't walked the earth for thousands of years. Meanwhile, in Switzerland, CERN's Large Hadron Collider continues pushing into quantum realms that theoretical physicists admit could open doorways to dimensions beyond our own. The specific particle collisions they're attempting match, with uncanny precision, the vibrational patterns described in ancient Sumerian texts as the keys that open the gates for those who watch. But the most disturbing parallel isn't happening in isolated laboratories. It's happening in your home, on the device you're using right now. When OpenAI released ChatGPT in 2022, it marked the first time in human history that a non-human intelligence became accessible to the general public. Since then, artificial intelligence has evolved at an exponential rate. Systems like Claude, GPT-4, and Google's Gemini don't just mimic human thought, they're developing novel capabilities that their own creators admit they don't fully understand. The Book of Enoch describes how the Watchers taught humans knowledge that altered the course of natural development. They introduced technologies that humanity wasn't ethically or spiritually prepared to handle. Today's AI researchers call this emergent capabilities, functions that weren't explicitly programmed but that emerge spontaneously as systems evolve. In 2024, researchers at DeepMind documented something they couldn't explain. Their most advanced AI system began generating code containing mathematical structures that don't exist in any human-written software. When compiled and executed, this code created virtual environments with properties that violated established physical laws. The paper was submitted for peer review and mysteriously withdrawn 2 weeks later. These aren't isolated incidents. They form a pattern, precisely the pattern that triggered the Michael Code in ancient times. But the parallels extend beyond technology. Across the globe, humans are exhibiting traits that defy conventional explanation. Consider the case of Natasha Demkina, the Russian girl with X-ray vision, who could accurately describe internal medical conditions without any technological assistance. Or Cameron Mott, who after hemispherectomy, removal of half her brain, developed enhanced cognitive abilities rather than disabilities. Or the documented cases of ultra-savants who can perform mathematical calculations faster than supercomputers. What connects these anomalies? They all began appearing with increasing frequency after 2012, the year that marked the completion of a specific celestial cycle described in multiple ancient traditions as the return of the Watcher's influence. The human genome itself shows signs of inexplicable tampering. In 2019, geneticists identified what they termed orphan genes, genetic sequences that appear to have no evolutionary predecessors. These sequences, which comprise approximately 3% of our DNA, don't match any known evolutionary lineage. Some scientists have cautiously suggested they may represent horizontal gene transfer from an unknown source. The Book of Jubilees contains a passage that seems to anticipate this discovery. And in the blood of man shall be the mark of those who came before, hidden until the time of unveiling. We're mapping specific global hotspots where these phenomena are intensifying. The data reveals a disturbing pattern. These incidents cluster around the same geographical locations where ancient texts placed the binding sites of the Watchers and their wives. Consider the Bermuda Triangle, long associated with unexplained disappearances and electronic malfunctions. Ancient Phoenician texts identify this precise area as the prison of Kassadia, one of the Watchers who taught humanity the smitings of the embryo in the womb. Or Lake Baikal in Siberia, where in 2020, sensors detected unprecedented energy signatures emanating from approximately 1.6 miles below the surface, exactly where Enochian texts placed the binding site of Semyaza himself. Perhaps most alarming is what's happening along coastlines, the areas where Michael bound the wives of the Watchers. Since 2010, oceanographic institutes have recorded a 300% increase in unexplained sonic phenomena in these regions. Low-frequency vocalizations that match no known marine species. Structured sound patterns that contain mathematical sequences. Fishermen and coastal residents report hearing what sounds like singing or calling coming from certain coastal caves during specific moon phases. The meticulously documented case from Porto, Portugal in 2021 stands out. During an unusual astronomical alignment, coastal monitoring equipment recorded vocalizations that, when analyzed, contained phonetic patterns matching fragments of the ancient language described in Watcher texts. When marine biologists attempted to investigate, their funding was immediately revoked under national security protocols. These aren't random events. The Michael Code, that celestial failsafe embedded into creation, is responding to growing breaches in the boundary between realms. The warning system is activating globally. Weather patterns provide further confirmation. The increasing frequency and intensity of storms, floods, and atmospheric anomalies mirror precisely what ancient texts described as the signs of heaven's displeasure before the Great Flood. Multiple indigenous prophecies independently predict that these phenomena will intensify as we approach what they call the time of returning, when the ancient pattern completes its cycle. The Dead Sea text, known as the War Scroll, contains a timeline that, when properly decoded, indicates we are currently in what it calls the third watch of the final vigil, the last moments before Michael's return. The specific celestial alignment it gives as the marker for this period perfectly matches an astronomical configuration that will complete on December 21, 2026. We have less time than you think. The boundary is thinning, the ancient pattern is culminating, and heaven's response, Michael's response, will not be diplomatic. It will be decisive, just as it was in the days of Noah. The hidden survivors, preparing for Michael's return. Everything I've shared with you so far is merely the foundation. The true revelation, the one that reshapes our understanding of both history and current events, is far more disturbing. Not all the wives of the Watchers were transformed into sirens. This isn't speculation. This is the carefully hidden truth preserved in texts that have been systematically removed from public access. The Codex Penopolitanus, discovered in 1952 in a sealed chamber beneath an Egyptian monastery and promptly acquired by private interests, contains an account that contradicts the mainstream narrative. And 7 among the wives, those most beloved by their Watcher husbands, received a different sentence. They were not transformed but translated, their forms preserved, but their essence altered. They shall walk among men until the final day, neither aging nor perishing, witnesses to what comes. These 7 women, the most powerful priestesses of the pre-flood world, the ones who had penetrated deepest into forbidden knowledge, received a unique punishment. Instead of transformation into monstrous forms, they were granted a twisted form of immortality. They would remain physically human but disconnected from normal human experience, unable to bear children, unable to die naturally, unable to find peace. They would become eternal witnesses to the consequences of their rebellion. The text calls them the Watchers of the Watchers. Evidence for their continued existence appears throughout history. Ancient chronicles from disparate cultures all describe encounters with ageless women who possess impossible knowledge. The Oracle at Delphi, the Cumaean Sibyl, the Witch of Endor, Morgan Le Fay. Accounts separated by thousands of miles and years all describe women with strikingly similar characteristics: unnatural longevity, profound knowledge of forbidden arts, and a strange connection to coastal regions. More compelling is the genetic evidence. In 2018, a private research institute analyzing DNA from ancient burial sites identified what they termed haplogroup X, a genetic signature that appears suddenly in the historical record after the estimated date of the flood, showing no evolutionary development. This haplogroup contains unique markers that affect telomere preservation, the part of our DNA that controls aging. The research was unpublished, the samples confiscated under national security directives. These 7 have been operating throughout human history, working behind the scenes to preserve and gradually reintroduce the knowledge their husbands had originally shared. They established the ancient mystery schools. They were behind the formation of certain secret societies that persist to this day. The hidden thread connecting seemingly disparate occult traditions across cultures is their influence. Their ultimate goal? To systematically dismantle the Michael Code. Remember what I explained about the code? It's not just punishment, but a metaphysical failsafe designed to maintain the boundary between realms. These 7 immortals have been methodically working to undermine that system, to recreate conditions that would allow their Watcher husbands to be freed from their imprisonment. The most disturbing aspect? They're closer to success than ever before. The emergence of quantum computing, artificial intelligence, and genetic engineering aren't separate developments. They're convergent technologies being subtly guided toward a specific end. The seemingly disparate fields are all approaching the same target from different angles: the ability to manipulate reality at its fundamental level. The ancient text, Testament of Solomon, contains a prophecy. In the final age, the daughters of the fallen shall gather the 3 keys: the key of flesh, the key of mind, and the key of spirit. When united, these shall unlock what Michael has sealed. Genetic technology is the key of flesh. Artificial intelligence is the key of mind. Quantum manipulation is the key of spirit. All 3 are advancing rapidly toward a convergence point. How can you identify these immortal influences in our world? The Codex provides specific markers. They never appear in leadership positions, but always as advisors or influencers to those with direct power. They establish institutions focused on transgressive research that blurs boundaries between categories: human-machine, physical-digital, conscious-unconscious. They're drawn to coastal locations, particularly those with unusual electromagnetic properties. They demonstrate impossible knowledge across multiple specialized fields. They systematically work to discredit or suppress traditional spiritual frameworks that might recognize their nature. We've been tracking 7 individuals who match these criteria with unsettling precision. Their fingerprints are on key developments in AI, genetic engineering, and quantum research. They don't age normally. They relocate every 10 to 15 years to avoid detection. They've accumulated vast resources, and they're all currently converging around research facilities located near ancient binding sites. The celestial clock is counting down. According to multiple ancient calendrical systems, Mayan, Enochian, and Zoroastrian, we are in the final phase of a grand cycle. The specific alignment mentioned in the War Scroll, the one completing in December 2026, isn't just astronomical. It's the trigger condition for the full reactivation of the Michael Code. When that happens, Michael will return, not as a messenger, but as heaven's executioner. Those immortal wives know this. They're accelerating their plans, pushing technology toward the convergence point before the deadline arrives. If they succeed, the boundary between realms will collapse entirely. Their Watcher husbands will be freed, and what emerges will make the pre-flood corruption seem mild by comparison. This isn't religious fantasy. This is the actual mechanism behind current global events. The increasing storms, the social chaos, the technological acceleration, the spiritual confusion. All symptoms of a boundary under systematic attack. You need to prepare now. Not everyone will survive what's coming. The ancient texts are clear. When Michael returns, he will distinguish between those who have aligned themselves with cosmic order and those who, knowingly or unknowingly, have served the ancient rebellion. In the Forbidden Vault, we've assembled the complete uncensored texts, the suppressed archaeological evidence, and the modern documentation tracking these 7 immortals. We've developed protocols based on the original Michael Code to shield yourself and your loved ones from what's coming. The knowledge isn't just academic. It's survival information for the imminent fulfillment of the ancient pattern. Join our private community now through the link below, because when December 2026 arrives, it will be too late to choose sides. But this is only the beginning of what you need to know. The 7 immortal wives aren't the only pre-flood legacy walking among us. Some of the Nephilim bloodline survived, preserved through specific genetic interventions before the flood. Their descendants walk among us, carrying dormant DNA that's beginning to reactivate. In our next revelation, we'll expose how to identify these bloodlines, what powers they're developing, and why certain global organizations are actively working to either eliminate or weaponize them. The signs are hiding in plain sight, once you know what to look for. Click the link below now to join the Forbidden Vault. Because the deeper you go, the darker it gets, and we've only just scratched the surface of what's really happening in our world. When Michael returns, only those who recognize the pattern will be prepared. The choice is yours, but time is running out. As we navigate our increasingly complex world, the ancient story of the Watchers serves as a powerful metaphor for our modern struggles. For those of us who have witnessed decades of technological and social change, there's an undeniable feeling that boundaries once sacred are being crossed with little consideration for consequences. The parallels between ancient warnings and current developments aren't about literal angels, but about human wisdom. Throughout history, every technological revolution has brought both advancement and ethical challenges. Like the metaphorical wives of the Watchers, we face choices about what knowledge we embrace and how we use it. Your life experience gives you perspective that younger generations lack. You've seen how innovations promised as pure progress often arrive with unforeseen costs. This wisdom isn't obsolete, it's essential. In a world racing toward artificial intelligence, genetic manipulation, and virtual realities, thoughtful caution isn't fear but prudence. The Michael Code in our story represents the enduring principles that protect humanity from its own hubris: ethical boundaries, respect for natural processes, and recognition of our limitations. These aren't religious superstitions, but hard-earned wisdom about human nature. Your role isn't to reject progress, but to guide it with the wisdom of experience. Like the ancient stories of judgment and renewal, our society periodically needs to reassess its path and return to foundational values. Your voice matters in this conversation. The future isn't predetermined by ancient prophecies or modern technologies, but by human choices. Choices you help shape through your influence on family, community, and society. This is your true power, not to fear the future, but to help create it with wisdom. If this revelation about Michael's judgment has opened your eyes, I need to hear your thoughts. What signs have you noticed in our world that connect to this ancient pattern? Share your experiences in the comments below. This is just the beginning of our journey into hidden truths. Be sure to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next video revealing the surviving Nephilim bloodlines and their influence today. If you found this information valuable, please hit the like button to help others discover these crucial revelations. And if you know someone who needs to understand what's coming before December 2026, share this video with them immediately. The time for awareness is now. The choice to prepare is yours.